Is there a game that you played growing up that you knew was crap, but you played it anyway because it's what you had, and then fast forward to now and you realize you're still playing it? Or maybe there's a game that you like that everyone else just relentlessly hates on, and you can't quite wrap your head around why. I don't think a game needs to be a perfect 10 out of 10 to be enjoyable. It could be so bad it's good. That's what we're looking at today. Games you love that everyone hates. Okay, so hear me out. I think War Gods is a good game. But by good, I mean like B-movie good. Is it going to win any awards in any particular department? Absolutely not. But you go into a B-movie knowing it's about to be cheesy as hell and goofy. That's how I look at War Gods. Almost everything about this game feels clunky and half-assed, but that's also part of its charm for me. Midway had this signature cheesiness to it with several of its games, especially fighting games in the 90s, another example being Mace the Dark Age for the N64. And this is another one to add to that cheesy pile, though Mace was much better. But I look at War Gods as just dumb fun. The game was meant to be a test of a new 3D engine by Midway, which allowed them to experiment before eventually making Mortal Kombat 4 to find out what works and what doesn't. And I think that was a pretty smart move considering how much better Mortal Kombat 4 plays than this. So War Gods is your standard fighting game. It has 10 characters with 2 unlockable bosses, all of which are questionable yet interesting in their design, some more than others. It has a combo system that somewhat reminds me of Mortal Kombat 3 but in 3D. It has that familiar linearity to it when it comes to stringing moves together. Each character has a single fatality. Some of them are kind of generic, while others are straight up goofy. I actually really dig the announcer guy. I think he's pretty cool. That's something Midway does right every time.
Maximus, you are chosen.
The button inputs for some moves can be kinda weird compared to other fighting games. If you happen to have an arcade stick though, this isn't really an issue. As long as you don't take the game too seriously and take the time to really figure out the moves, this one may grow on you. When I was a kid, I thought this game was 100% garbage. I hated it, I couldn't figure it out, and I wanted my $5 back from renting it at Blockbuster. But now that I'm older, I enjoy firing this up from time to time just to get some of that 90s Midway goodness. Mortal Kombat 4 continues that trend of dumb fun but much more polished. This game I think is a bit divisive. Over the years I've seen quite a few people badmouth this game, but it still does have a solid fan base of its own at the same time. Some moves are kinda samey, but the game plays extremely well, it's very fast paced, and for me it doesn't have to have the depth other fighting games do for it to be fun in this case. It's probably the most accessible Mortal Kombat game in the series, has a good roster in my opinion, and it had high production quality for the time it was made. Advertisements for this game were awesome too, the hype was real. Just look how badass Reptile and Scorpion are in this commercial, and Raiden with his huge mallet, come on.
The slashing edge of the blade.
The Dreamcast version, Mortal Kombat Gold especially, got a lot of hate at the time, and outside of the occasional bug, I really don't know why. I think it's the best version of the game next to the arcade version, and it has an even bigger roster with 5 extra characters added and I believe a couple extra stages too. As for the character moves, it's comedy gold, and the fatalities are downright silly. Mortal Kombat 4 was also the first game in the series to have actual cutscenes for character endings instead of just a still image and text, and the cutscenes are that much more hilarious.
Wait, this is brutality! You can't do it! Wrong, Jarek. This is not a brutality. This is a fatality.
The only complaint or critique I have about this game is I wish they just had a couple more ninjas like Ermac or Rain, and I wish they brought back the friendships and animalities. Imagine how funny the friendships would be in Mortal Kombat 4 considering the fatalities that there already are. Either way, there's no telling how many countless hours I've spent on MK4, especially when I was a kid. I've owned every single version of it at one point ever since its launch for one reason or another, and there were some good times with it.
Honey, I'm home.
The original PlayStation was booming with mascot-type platformer games, just like the 16-bit generation. You had Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Rayman, Tomba, Gex, the list goes on. Blasto was yet another one to add to that pile. I remember it getting pretty decent promotion back in the day. It was on a few PlayStation Underground demo discs with a lot of behind-the-scenes footage. That footage on the disc that I had was really fun checking out at the time. It had the voice actor showing him recording his voiceovers for Blasto. It made me pretty hyped. After all that effort though with their marketing, Blasto reviewed quite poorly when it came out. GameSpot giving it a 4 out of 10, IGN giving it a 5 out of 10, several other gamers having as little as 1-star ratings. I don't care, I still love Blasto. Maybe it's nostalgia goggles because of when it came out, but I loved it back then and I still love it now. I really don't know how 11, 12-year-old me was able to beat it though, because there are parts in this game that are borderline unfair. You will die in this game a lot. But even so, I still like revisiting it occasionally. Blasto himself kind of reminds me of Gex. He's a fun, cartoony character, constantly making wisecracks while you're playing. Sort of reminds me of like a lighthearted version of Duke Nukem where he's going, "Hot damn, I'm good," and stuff like that whenever he, blows up an enemy or rescues a babe. Yeah, that's the objective here. To get through the levels, you have to rescue quote-unquote babes to unlock the exits. If that's not Duke Nukem, I don't know what is. But the gameplay itself is fairly solid with decent level design, and sound design is great, I think. It's definitely far from perfect. There's hardly any textures. The control can be pretty horrible at times, and the draw distance isn't very good. But even underneath all those flaws, it's still a pretty fun experience, as long as you're patient. I honestly wish this game got another chance and had a sequel. If it were improved upon, I think it could have really been turned into something special. Many people badmouth Streets of Rage 3, especially dedicated Sega fans, just because it isn't Streets of Rage 2. At least that's the conclusion I've come up with. I've played tons of beat-em-ups for the 16-bit generation, and I still think Streets of Rage 3 is among the best of them. Whether you're playing on the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx, whatever. No, it's not as good as Streets of Rage 2, but that game is pretty hard to top in general. While different, I think it has an awesome soundtrack. It's much more gritty, has almost an industrial type vibe to it, which is cool. I also love the fact that you can run on this game now. You can also roll up and down, which acts as a sidestep to dodge attacks, which is handy. All around, it's a little bit faster paced than 2, not only with running, but slightly faster animations. I guess that's the blast processing at work, right? There are a lot of cool characters, both good and bad. There's a new guy named Zan you can play as, which a lot of people either love him or hate him. I actually like him. I think he's pretty cool because he has a really long reach and he has some pretty good dash moves, so I like using him every now and then. The color palettes, as you can see, are a little weird in the US version, but it's not the end of the world. If it's really that important to you, play the Japanese version. Play Bare Knuckle 3. The only real critique I have to give it is that the extra speed given to this game can screw with the hit detection sometimes. For example, Axel's punching animation has always been only a frame or two, so combine that with the speed increase, and there's a tendency to miss your opponent sometimes when you throw a punch, and that can be a little annoying. Still though, Streets of Rage 3 is rock solid, fun as hell if you play it with a friend, and it's fairly lengthy for a beat 'em up. How can you complain about having another Streets of Rage game at your disposal unless it's just legitimately bad, which it's not. If you want to see a real turd, fire up Batman Forever. Now here's a definite black sheep game of a series, or at least it was. Zero probably took its place in that regard. But Star Fox Assault back when it came out received pretty underwhelming feedback, and I really don't understand why. First off, it had been 8 years since Star Fox 64 came out, and since we had a proper Star Fox game. We got Star Fox Adventures a couple years before, but it wasn't really Star Fox. But when I played Assault for the first time, I was slightly skeptical because of all the reviews I'd been reading, and I was pleasantly surprised. The game is gorgeous, first of all. The control is excellent, it's non-stop action. I know many people complain about the on-foot sections, but they really didn't bother me. The on-foot controls do take a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, I actually even enjoyed those parts. I thought they were fun. I think they really amp up the action because sometimes you would have to alternate between getting into the air or getting back to the ground, just depending on the objective of the level. For example, if you're working on something on the ground, but then you got one of your teammates being attacked or something, you have to run to your ship and then get in the air and take care of that, then come back down. I think it was implemented pretty well. Having that said, it can get a slight bit repetitive, but at the same time, if it was just 100% flight missions, I would imagine there would be people complaining about there not being any variety. When I was capturing the game footage for this, I seriously didn't want to stop playing. I was having a blast. I played it for about 2.5 hours straight before I actually moved on to do something else. If you're a fan of Star Fox or rail shooters in general, I would highly recommend giving Star Fox Assault a shot. It has aged quite well, it's still a great game, and it looks amazing even now. Slippy's still an annoying little shit though. Of course I had to mention Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. This was the first Castlevania game I ever played, and when I was a kid, I really didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was too young to grasp it, but I didn't care. It was still awesome, albeit hard as balls. As many game overs as I got, over and over, I still kept coming back to it. I just loved the whole atmosphere of it. From the spooky intro music to the day and night cycles, I thought that was just the coolest thing, and I still do. There are a few Halloween or horror themed NES games, but none of them really do it quite as well as Castlevania in my opinion. I mean, there's Jekyll and Hyde, no. As far as the NES Castlevania games go, I think 2 has the best soundtrack of them all, and I will die on that hill. Say what you want about this game, the music is top tier. Simon's Quest, along with the first Metroid, are pretty much the first Metroidvanias we ever had, before we even knew what the hell a Metroidvania was. And the thought of an open world game on an 8-bit system that's not just a traditional RPG like Final Fantasy is just amazing to me. Still is. There are definitely some shortcomings, don't get me wrong, this is not a perfect game, which if you're watching this video, you're well aware of that. But the game is cryptic, the US translation is not the greatest, there's no in-game map. Without Nintendo power back in the day, you were pretty much just going to chase your tail in circles trying to figure this game out. Not to mention those stupid invisible holes in the ground where you have to throw the holy water over and over and over just so you don't fall down. And yeah, the bosses are kind of a pushover. But despite all that, I still think Simon's Quest is very special for what it is, and there has not been another game quite like it, at least not that I know of. You've got stuff like Symphony of the Night, which is a masterpiece, but even that doesn't have as many of the RPG elements like talking to people to get clues on what you're supposed to do, or having the day and night cycles. Simon's Quest isn't my favorite Castlevania, it's not even my favorite NES Castlevania, in fact it's my least favorite. But that isn't saying much because I love all of them. It's definitely not for everybody, but this is a video about games I love that everyone hates. I'm actually not positive if WWF Royal Rumble or Raw are still universally hated. I think it's about 50-50, but I wanted to mention it anyway. This is another example of one of those dumb fun types of games where you just shut your brain off for a few minutes, have some quick shenanigans, and go about your day. This game's made by the one and only Laughing Joking Numbnuts. Yep, LJN. And I did have a lot of fun with this game growing up. I still get a kick out of playing it once in a blue even now. Has a decent roster, the themes are there for the characters, you can pick up a chair and smack your opponent with it, you can get on the turnbuckle and jump on your opponent, you can run into the referee and knock him down. Good times. While there's really nothing special about this game, at the time of its release, your options for good wrestling games were very limited, especially licensed ones. If you look at the wrestling games on the NES, for example, they're all pretty much trash. This is at least fun. And the best part of this game, of course, is the Royal Rumble mode. And it's exactly what it sounds like. All the wrestlers get into the ring and just start beating the hell out of each other all at the same time. Not really much else to say about this one. What you see here is what you get, and I like it. Street Fighter 2010 is a weird specimen. It's made by Capcom, you play as Ken, the subtitle is The Final Fight, but this has nothing to do with either Final Fight or Street Fighter. It predates Street Fighter 2 by a year. Final Fight came out in '89, this came out in '90, and Street Fighter 2 came out in '91. What a weird title and what a weird time frame. This one got mostly mixed reviews, so I guess it's not really universally hated, but I wanted to mention it anyway. AVGN did do a video on it, so I guess there's that. In the distant year of 2010, you play as a guy named Ken. I don't know if it's Ken Masters or just another guy named Ken, I guess, in space. and the graphics are a mixture of like an H.R. Geiger alien type style to sometimes being pretty psychedelic. The first level especially has sort of a cyberpunk feel to it. I personally think this game looks great though. It has good animation, a lot of detail, and I think this is one of the better looking games on the NES. It runs very well too. The gameplay itself is pretty unique. It's mostly a boss rush, though there are some brief platforming sections thrown in, but a vast majority of the time you're after a boss. There aren't really any other games on the NES that's quite like this, the way it's implemented. It isn't perfect, but it works for this game, and I think it's at the very least interesting. Having that said though, it is definitely NES hard. It will kick your ass. It can be just relentless at times. Controls are decent though. When you're moving, they're very responsive. When you're shooting, it's kind of a mixed bag. It can throw you off at first. For example, if you want to shoot diagonally up, you have to hit down and B. When you're running or jumping and flipping around, it reminds me of Ninja Gaiden, except much lower gravity since you're in space. A big strength though is the music. The music in this game is very catchy, very reminiscent of Mega Man. I would actually be surprised though if it wasn't any good, considering this is a Capcom game we're looking at. Capcom always has awesome music. The first time I played this was when I got it from a flea market vendor as a kid. NES and Super Nintendo and Genesis, they were being phased out at the time because PlayStation was current. So he had been selling games, NES games mostly, for like $5 or less. I was absolutely obsessed with Street Fighter 2, so when I got this home, I was really excited. But I was also surprised when I actually fired it up. I guess is the word. Surprised? Disappointed? I don't know. Disappointed but intrigued. We'll just call it that. I didn't care too much for it at the time. I thought it looked really cool, but again, this game will destroy you. I couldn't wrap my head around it at the time, but as I got older, I started to really enjoy it more and I started appreciating it more. I actually managed to beat it a couple times. Despite it kicking my ass over and over, it's very satisfying when you actually manage to pass a level. If you're looking for something a bit different on the NES, I would recommend giving this one a shot. Just ignore the fact that it's called Street Fighter. I don't know too much about the history of Marvel Nemesis in terms of how it came to be, what fueled the fire to make the game, other than the fact that it was the first Marvel and EA collaboration. That may just be all it was, I don't know. They did make a limited 6-issue comic book series to tie into it, but boy did they drop the ball on this game. It's a classic case of being a mix of great ideas with poor execution. It fell flat on its face in terms of critic reviews when it was released, averaging around the 5 out of 10 mark most places. However, I still find this game pretty enjoyable as long as you can look past the shortcomings. So put it simply, this game is Power Stone with Marvel characters. It's a one-on-one fighter. Instead of moving side to side, you have a big open space to run around in. There are interactive environments with the ability to do things like smack your opponent with a telephone pole or throw a truck at them, which is cool. And this mechanic in particular can get pretty hectic if you or the other person or the computer is constantly going for those projectiles. There is a dark and gritty atmosphere and art style to this game that I really like. I think it's pretty cool and unique the way they did it, and it's actually the reason why I had this game on my radar to begin with when it was first being previewed. It kind of reminds me of something DC would do, maybe in like the Batman Arkham series games, and this was well before the Arkham series even existed. Many people really did not take a liking to the imperfect characters in this game, which were basically just original characters not related to the Marvel Universe, but I actually thought they were kind of a fun addition. Johnny Ohm in particular I think is pretty cool with his electrical abilities. There's also a fairly solid single player mode, which is a little more than just your typical one-on-one fighting. It mixes things up a bit by giving you small objectives, and it may throw more than one enemy at you at once that you have to take out. This can also make the levels slightly more expansive. Now for the not so great. The number one problem with Marvel Nemesis is the control. It's terrible. It takes a while to get used to, and even when you do, it is still clunky. While you're figuring it out, expect to get completely wrecked by the computer if you're in single player mode and playing this for the first time. It's just not very responsive, and the animation is not the smoothest in the world either, so with that combination, I understand how this can totally ruin the game for some people. The next thing is that janky camera. Oh my god. It just never feels right no matter what angle or how zoomed in or out it is. When you or your enemy take a hard hit, the camera likes to zoom in ultra close on the action in an attempt to make it look more cinematic, but most of the time, it will just zoom in on a random object like the wall or a pillar or something instead of the actual character. And this happens so often that it ends up just being more of a distraction or an interruption from the fight. Also, depending on how far away you are, if a lot of things are happening on screen, finding your character is like trying to keep track of the puck at a hockey game. And the music, while not bad, is pretty generic and not very memorable. And there's not all that much to the game in terms of content. I think it could use a few more characters, more special moves and abilities, maybe more things to chuck at your other opponent. It could definitely also use a few more levels. The fighting, while fun, is seriously lacking in depth because it just gets repetitive after a while because you're so limited in what you can do. Despite all this though, there's a reason why this game is on this list. It's because I still enjoy playing it. The atmosphere of the game and the over-the-top nature of the fighting is what keeps me coming back to it now and again. Marvel Nemesis is definitely a mediocre game and it deserves all the bashing it gets. It was just overall a missed opportunity. It could have been so much better had they just given it more polish. But I still happen to find enjoyment out of it at the end of the day. If you like games like Power Stone or Urgeist, give this one a look. I was going to make Boxing Legends of the Ring my 10th game on the list. I used to love it, but when I went back and tried it again, yeah, it sucks. So I'm leaving number 10 up to you guys. Comment below, or even better, make a video response. What are some games you think deserve a second chance? Is it B-movie good? So bad it's good? Or do guys like me just have terrible taste? Until next time, it's been real. Thank you everyone for watching, and horns up.